Hello there everyone, welcome back to another Gate Ruler video, and in this one I'm going to be discussing a very interesting topic, I think, and one that has been rather hotly debated since the rules and the full set list has come out, and that is how many copies of Haunting should you be running? Well, it's an interesting question, and the answer is either exactly as simple or not as simple as it appears. It is my opinion, and you'll know this if you've seen my Crime Nauts faction focus, which will be shown in the card over there. I suggest you go give that a watch. Is I think you should be running 4. So first, let's have a look at what Haunting does. So Haunting is a accident-traded counter event with a level of -5. The counter is to play it, and you take 2 damage when it's played. It also has a use timing of open card, so when it enters your hand or when you drive it, you must play it immediately. This is before anything else happens in that instance. So if you were to drive it in your opening 2 cards for the turn in Apprentice or Highlander, you must play it immediately before anything else. So obviously this is a question in the context of Apprentice. This card is obviously completely pointless in Knight because they don't have a level limit, and in Highlander, since you can only run 1 anyway, running 1 is kind of a no-brainer, and that's sort of the bare minimum people would be considering running anyway. Like, I don't think there's any debate that you should be running Haunting. The debate is more, should I be running 1 to 2, 3 to 4, 4? That's sort of more what the debate is. I think if it should be fairly obvious to people that running this card is worth it. It is the question of how worth it is it. So the goal of this video is to educate you on my position as to why I think 4 Haunting is the way to go, and I'm going to provide some cons as well as pros, but I think on balance it's just worth it to go for the 4 Haunting route. So let's start off with the cons. Because this is something that players should be focused on, but I think it is also a sort of philosophical deck building question as well, and I'll discuss that in a little bit as well. But anyway, so the first con is if you run 4 copies of Haunting, you only have 12 heals in your deck. That is an objective fact. If you're running 4 of this, then you are having less heals. That is true. That is very much probably the biggest downside of playing 4 copies of Haunting. It is possible to spin it that that's not that big a deal, but fundamentally, if I could run the 16 heals in the 4 Haunting deck, I would absolutely run the 16 heals in the 4 Haunting deck. That is absolutely 100% a major con. The next con is you have a lower floor as a deck. So what's a floor? Well, when you talk about deck building, I say flaw not as in like a problem with the person, perhaps. I mean flaw as in that thing down there that you are probably standing or sitting on. So, anyway, what does a lower floor mean? Well, when you're talking about how a deck functions, there are sort of 3 things to keep in mind. So the first is the average. If you consider that as sort of the baseline, what is my deck doing most of the time? Like 50, 60% of the time, like the sort of range, like my deck is doing something in this kind of power region here, 50 to 60% of the time. You can imagine it as a normal distribution as well if that makes things easier, and it's just that bit, like a wedge in the middle. Then you have the ceiling of your deck. The ceiling of your deck is the high roll scenario. The reasonable high roll scenario, not the complete high roll scenario, something that's reasonably likely to happen, and that's sort of the, okay, this is great, my deck is performing at a very, very high level, this is not going to happen super often, but when it does, that's a very good thing. And as you might now be able to tell, the floor is the opposite. This is the absolute low roll scenario, what happens if this happens, and the reasonable low roll scenario. So a reasonable low roll scenario for a 4 Haunting deck is, well, what if I drive 2 Haunting? Or what if I damage 2 Haunting during the course of the game? Or what if I drive 1, damage 1? Seeing 2 copies of Haunting in a game is not that uncommon. 3 is reasonably uncommon, 4 is very uncommon. But like 2 to 3, that's not necessarily too uncommon. And I will say seeing, but I'll come back to that in a little bit. But yes, you are, of course, more likely to see copies of Haunting because you're playing more copies of Haunting. And damage checking them or driving them, particularly driving them, is really quite bad. And that is absolutely lowering the floor of your deck. And of course, with 4 copies of Haunting, as I've sort of said, you are more likely to draw one. And really drawing one is quite a big deal. Because when you consider what that means is, unless it's the first turn when you can get away with it, any subsequent turn, and I say first turn going first, any subsequent turn, that is 1 card less you're playing. And as an apprentice deck where you're only getting, in theory, 2 cards to play per turn, though, again, I'll sort of talk about that a little bit later, that is not ideal. That's quite bad, losing out on that. So those are the cons, and they're quite compelling cons. I will not... I'm not going to gloss over that. That is absolutely, those are compelling flaws. But let's talk about the pros. So whilst it's true that your floor is lower, frankly, I can think of very, very, very few decks in trading card games I've played where if you were to hit the floor and your opponent doesn't, you stood a reasonable chance of winning anyway. It is, in my opinion, if you are trying to play on a competitive level, that is the wrong way to look at things. I'm not saying it's not a valid way to look at things, and certainly years ago when I was first doing this, I would always think like, okay, but if I play this, like, what if I low roll, blah blah blah. You can't get worried about that. You've got to accept that, okay, low rolls are going to happen and L's are going to happen when they happen. And yes, 4 copies of Haunting is also going to make the low roll scenario a little more likely, but low rolls happen. What I'm more concerned with is high rolls. Because if the ceiling of my deck is such that a deck going at average is able to keep on pace, or not significantly behind my deck's ceiling, my deck's high roll, then that says something bad about my deck, because I don't really care how high my floor is if my average and my ceiling are like at, below another deck's average. Then what's the point in this deck? On a competitive level, I should say, on a competitive level. And this discussion is competitive. So I am more concerned with my ceiling value than my floor value, and with that sort of philosophy in mind, the fact that Haunting is ramming my ceiling up as high as it can go means that it's almost an instant inclusion. In my mind, that's almost enough in and of itself. The thing that really pushes me over, though, is when you consider, yes, this is driving my ceiling up massively. Now, because of all the level 3s I'm able to play, because of all the super high value cards I'm able to play, the chance of me doing ridiculous things turn after turn after turn is very, very high, relatively speaking. And then you consider the average. Yes, the average is much better in a 4 Haunting deck. That is because when you consider you include 1 copy of Haunting, and you're almost, for every 1 bad card, you're almost getting 2 level 3s. You're getting 1 level 3 and 1 level 2 for each copy of these, and that is a level 3 and a level 2 you are not able to include previously. That basically means that for each copy of Haunting, you are just strictly getting like 1 better card. Like your deck is just getting better for each copy of Haunting. Yeah, it's getting worse when you include the copy of Haunting, but then you add in the 2 and the 3, and it is better as a net plus. And that means that on average, you are going to be doing better things. And this is not just a theoretical thing. This is something I've tested. I've tested with 2 Hauntings. I did not enjoy the experience because it felt like the deck was, pretty weak. With 4 Hauntings, with just so much power there, if anything, I was feeling the decks were a bit too strong. So yes, better ceiling, better average. Now, a sort of soft counter, but not really, to the only 12 heals factor, which is very valid. The counters you do get to play, even though you only get to play 12 of them, will be on average better because you have more level space to work with. So, now I'm able to play, for example, in the Crime Lord deck. Well, now I can play 4 Schrodinger's Cat, and I could play 2 copies of Zap Zap Zap, or 2 Arthurs, and I could play, 4 copies of Crime Lord Base, when before that might actually be so restrictive in terms of level space with the former Leveless Prime I'd want to play as well, that I would not be able to do that. I'd be forced to run level 1 counters, or level 0 counters, or more level 2 counters. So when you do see a counter, as long as it's not haunting, it is more likely to be better for you. But I'm not under any illusions that that completely negates the fact there's only 12 of them. I'm just saying that whole 12 counter thing is not quite as bad as it sounds, but it is still bad. The final point I want to make on this is, whilst I think that my conclusion is pretty much true for any apprentice deck that is using your Imagine front, I really do think you should be playing for haunting. The best decks, which are going to be your Imagine and Wonderverse from my testing, are able to just dodge these hauntings even when they're running 4 copies of them. And that is, if nothing else has managed to convince you, this should, because at this point you're getting all the pros and you're also managing to dodge the cons half the time. Now, how are they dodging hauntings? Well, when you consider just how many cards there are that look at the top amount in this combination, let's go through them. So for example, if you were playing a robots deck and you're playing Wonderverse and your Imagine front, you have access to Yobiko, you have access to the robot version of Yobiko. So there's 2 cards there, so potentially 8 cards in your deck, which let you look at the top card and put it to the bottom if it's not a card you can set. You cannot set haunting. So this would take your haunting, shove it to the bottom of the deck, and you're never seeing that again. It's done, it's out. You also have Crystal, which is a definite 4 of, which is letting you look at the top 2. So now you're able to filter even harder through your hauntings. You've got those. You also have Emergency Combination. This looks at the top 4 for a robo or a military. So that is now 4 more cards you're essentially scanning through, and any hauntings are being shoved to the bottom. In the robot deck, you also have 1,000 Year Cherry Tree. Sorry, you have that in every single apprentice deck should be playing 1,000 Year Cherry Tree. That card is obscene. That's saying you look at the top 3 for something to drive, which means any hauntings you see in that top 3 can be shoved to the bottom immediately. And don't forget, it's possible to hit that 1,000 Year Cherry Tree off of the Yobiko or the robot version of the Yobiko or the Crystal, and then play that and then keep looking. So, these cards sort of chain together. There's also the charge option. So if, for example, you play Gashadokuro in Robo, or you're playing Crime Naught, so you see Malevolous Prime, those cards put the top 2 cards of the deck into charges. One of those cards could be a haunting. If you charge a haunting, you don't have to take the damage, you don't have to play it. So when you actually add all those up, that's actually a lot. That means that, on average, most of the hauntings you're seeing in my playtesting are actually going to be in charges or in top checks, and you're putting them to the bottom. It's actually relatively rare in that color combination to actually see the haunting. Probably once per game, maybe, if that. Sometimes you'll just go the whole game without seeing it at all. You essentially take your 4 haunting deck, and it is kind of like playing a 2 haunting deck because you have so much filter. Now, of course, there's a valid argument there to go, okay, but then if I was only playing 2 hauntings, well, now now I'm almost never seeing it. But then with 2 hauntings, it's like, okay, but are you able to fit in all your good pieces? Are you able to fit in all the filter? There's a trade-off. So that's sort of my stance. I hope I've explained the pros and cons well. I hope you understand sort of what I'm getting at. If you've got any questions, leave them in the comment section down below. But I hope I've convinced you that Haunting is a card that it's okay to be ballsy with. It's okay to go, yes, I'm going to play 4 of this. We're going to go for it. We're really going to embrace the high roll of Apprentice. And it's a very, very strong tool for Apprentice, and I'm glad they have it. And I would say it's a major contributing factor for why red-pink is a combination I see at the very, very top of the meta. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video today. If you did, please leave a like on the video. Please subscribe to the channel. I'd appreciate that. Please, as I say, I upload Gate videos. I upload Zenon's videos as well, but Gate Ruler videos has been a lot recently. Hit the bell for notifications when the next one goes up. I think that's all the shilling. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.